All right, welcome back. We are COMP301 in the summer 2020 semester, and it's part 2 of our broadcast for Linux operating systems. We're talking about Linux utilities, and I'm having my virtual coffee with all of you. So welcome back. So like I said just before we started the live stream, what I was asking about is for people's assignments. Hopefully you're well on your way to getting your first assignment completed, and because it's due tomorrow night at midnight, also quiz 2 is also due tomorrow night at midnight. So those two things are the things that I wanted to start with. So hopefully you guys have that under control. So let's talk about what we did last day. So last day we were working with a VM. So here's my VM, and I'm going to pull it up again. I'm going to spin it up. Now notice, if you look at the preview, this is kind of interesting. It shows you the screen that's been kind of left on. So one of the things I did differently this time around compared to what I normally do is I stop my VM in the middle without powering it down. And I keep telling you, power down your VM and all that kind of stuff. It's a good rule of thumb when it comes to kind of using a VM. Why? There's the danger when you have your virtual machine pause like this, and the danger is it may not spin up again. So even now, there's a risk that if I start this off, it may not work. And the danger's low. Okay, it's not like a huge danger. Bad things are going to happen to you or anything like that. But sometimes what happens is there's a disconnect. The links are broken between your Virtualbox and your VM, and then what happens is bad things can happen. And by the way, it's not just Virtualbox, it could also be on Vmware. And I think Vmware is an awesome tool. I actually prefer it over Virtualbox. There's more control. I think it's a better experience overall, but it is proprietary. And even though you guys have access to it, because as students, you have access to Vmware for free. I think later on, if you're going to, once you are done with school and you want it to continue, I think it's good to understand how to use Virtualbox, because then you can use it anytime. And look, we're running a free operating system and a free virtualization platform, and I think these are good things. So, coffee finished. Okay. So, what I wanted to do then is spin up my virtual machine here. I'm going to start it off. And you're going to see it's going to be slightly different than what we are used to because I've paused it. So what's happening now is it says it's restoring my virtual machine. Now this can take a different amount of time depending on your system. And what I've trapped here in the background is a couple of ways to fix up that mail problem that I had. So I fixed my mailing problem between me and myself. And you can see now that I'm back up. So the advantage of pausing the virtual machine, and I did that by actually clicking on the close button up here, which is like, do you want to, if I click on the close button again, it's going to ask you, do you want to save the virtual machine state? Do you want to send the shutdown signal? Or do you want to power off the machine? Powering it off is always safer, but you want to do it through the operating system itself, not through this. Save the virtual machine state is what I did last time. And when you do a capture of the virtual machine state, like I said, sometimes, not always, but sometimes, in a very rare case, you lose the links and some bad things happen. So I don't want to do that right now, but I got a couple of links that I was looking up how to fix my problem. And one of the things that we didn't do right last time was this install of Postfix. I forgot to do this with you guys. MailX was the way we install the mail. So what I'd like you guys to do now in your terminals, right? So again, if you go to your terminal for this, so here it is. What you'd want to do is you want to install Postfix again. So you can do a sudo, even if you have it in, by the way, I can do it again. DNF install Postfix. And if you did that, Postfix is the thing that's going to install our, it says no such command. Oh yeah, that'd be nice if I spelled it properly. How about that? Ha ha ha. Let's try that again. So it's going to go through, and even though I have it, it's going to reinstall it again. And there's nothing wrong with installing it a second time. On Mac and as well as Linux systems, it says it'll check to see if there's anything that's going to be done. And in this case, what it's done for me, it says, hey, look, it's already installed. I don't have to do anything, right? If it's not installed, it'll install it. But you need Postfix in order for you to make this MailX, the mail program, work, like we talked about before. Okay, so please do that now. Please install Postfix. And why am I getting you to do that? Because I want you to understand how to create a little mailer between you and another user if you're going to manage this thing. Again, it's one of the outcomes of this week, so I wanted to make sure you know how to do it. Okay, so that's the first part. Second part is, and again, this is another little thread that I found that's really good. We also, sometimes you'll get is an error that says, warning, unable to look up public pickup or whatever, no such directory. And you want to use this command now, make FIFO, right, /var spool postfix public pickup. And then what you want to do is after that, service postfix restart. So what's happening is postfix itself is a like a postman. And what this will do, this service postfix restart, what it'll do is it'll restart the postfix service to allow you to run your machine. So what it looks like after you do this, so first do this command right here, and then do this command in that order. So let's suppose I've already done this. I don't want to redo this one. Okay, you want to do this once, because what this does is it actually creates a public area for your postfix. Okay, so that's what you want to do for picking up mail. But what you can do, I'll show what it looks like to stop a service. So if I say service, right, and by the way, you need to probably do this with super user do, right, service, so super user do, service, come on Tom, postfix restart, there we go. And if I was to do that and press enter, it's going to say redirecting to bin, and it says restart postfix service, and it's done. Okay, that's pretty much done. So now if you followed me and did what I did, and if you kind of installed postfix and you restarted the service after you used the command make FIFO. By the way, if you don't know what that command is, if we just trace that, let's see what make FIFO does. It says makes FIFO named pipes. So it creates named pipes, FIFO, first in, first out, with given names, and there's mandatory arguments for it, right? And basically if you want to, there's some options here for the mode and so on, but more or less what this does is it creates a link for Postfix to where you can pick up mail. All right, that's what it does, and I found that this one worked for me for Fedora Linux. Okay, so now once you've got that going on, let's clear the screen, and if I just type in mail, I can type in a subject, so -s for subject, and I can say the subject is, hello there, right? And then followed by who is getting it, the recipient of the mail. So for example, if I send it to, someone else, like, remember we made another user account, by the way, if you don't remember that, and if you don't know what the users are, you can always go to, like, I don't remember what I did. Let's suppose I can always go to settings, so show applications, go to settings. This is before I do anything here, before I finish this off, and I can go and I can see that I made a user called Tom Smite, right? And it's tom.smythe. That's a weird name, but what the heck. By the way, inspiration from St. John Smythe of James Bond fame. All right, I'm not James Bond, but Tom Smythe, who cares? So let's suppose that I can kind of do that in there. I can say tom.smythe, right? And then if I press enter, it's going to put me into sending mail mode, which is going to allow me to make a short message to send some mail. So let's say, for example, hi, this is a short message, between users, Tom, right? And then what you want to do is press Control D to have it sent. So everything goes well, Control D, and it says you should get this end of file, basically, equivalent, end of transmission is what EOT is. And then you've sent the mail off. Now you can't see that the user got that mail, right? I'm just sending a mail to that user. So let's log in as Tom Smythe. Hopefully I can remember his password. I can't remember probably. But let's suppose that I can. And I'll log in. I'm going to leave my user account logged in. And I'm going to just go to up here to the top right, and I'm going to, where it says power off, log out, I'm going to switch user, and I'm going to go back to one day when it feels like it. There we go, Tom Smythe. And I'll put in my password for Tom Smythe. And if I did it right, and by the way, sometimes this is a weird thing. I don't know if it's just the virtual machine or if it's Linux Fedora itself, but it'll just like take me back to the login screen again for some reason or other. Like bounce me out, and it does that a couple times. Don't worry about it. Ignore it. Just move on. Remember, you're working in a virtualized environment, so it's not always perfect, right? Like this. See, perfect. It did exactly what I told you it was going to do. So again, put in your password. Second time, same thing. It's like it has to register the fact that we have multiple users on the system or something. All right, so now you can see that I'm in another account. I've logged in, and I want to go to my mail. So I'm going to go just pull up terminal here. So I'll type in terminal. And this is another account. So remember, this is Tom Smythe. That's who the user is. You can see the user right here, Tom Smythe, right? And what I can do is just type the keyword mail and then press enter. And it's going to show you that I have one. And it came from who? Tom, right? And by the way, it says there's the location of the mail, var spool mail Tom Smythe. It's actually created a place for me to get my mail. That's what it should work like that for you as well. Yes, we'll do that. We'll do the external mail for a second. We'll do that in just a sec. So let's try this out. So you can see here I got hello there, and I want to look at it. You see this little ampersand sign. If I put the 1 in there, I'm looking at mail number 1, and press enter, you can see this is my message, right? So status is red now. So you can see that N is new, R is red, and I can actually get the mail, and it tells me who sent it from Tom at localhost.local domain. That's where it came from, okay? And then I can do a couple things. If I want to delete, right? So if I say I want to delete 1, then I can do that. And then if I, if I want to do a list, you can see that these are all the commands that I can do. Print, visual, top, touch, all these other commands that I can do on the terminal. I can also just press quit. So if I did this and clear the screen and then say mail again, you can see that there's no mail because I've already checked. Let's send a mail back to Tom. Just try that one more time. So mail again. Here's the subject -s. Thanks for your email, right? And we'll send it to Tom. Notice that I'm just sending it to an internal user, so it's just the name of the internal user that I'm using. And hey Tom, thanks for your email test, right? TS for Tom Smythe, right? And then Control D, sent the mail. And let's log off this user. So I'll go here and go to power off log, say log out this time. And yes, log out. It should take me back to the scene switcher or the login screen again, which allows me to log into one of these guys again. Let's log in Tom. And if I make a mistake with my password, it's going to do this. By the way, I knew I was making a mistake after I started typing it. I'm back, right? And if I type in mail now, just like before, I get a email coming in from the other user, from Tom Smythe, multiple people on my system. And by the way, this is the way we used to do it back in the day. Because if you remember, back in the day, the only way you could do it was to send internal mail like this. Sending external mail to another user was more complex, and we'll talk about how to do that. So if I was to read the mail now, if I said 1, you can see that here I got my message. And if I kind of put the word just delete in there and then quit and type in mail, again, it's gone, no mail for Tom, right? So that's kind of the way you can do it. You can have multiple messages, but what about sending it externally? Now, one of the things is if you try and send it externally, you need a kind of an external mailer, which is kind of weird. You can try sending it from Linux, but remember, we're in a virtual environment. Sometimes it'll work and sometimes it won't. So here's the thing. Can you make it so that there's a different switch? Let's go man mail. And you can see that mailx is send and receive internet mail. Let's take a look at the options we have. So it says -s for subject, and we kind of did this already. Plus, first of all, there's a bunch of original options. These are all the options that you can put beforehand, okay? And then -s for subject, -a for attachment if I want to attach something, -c for CC addresses, -b for BCC, -r for from address if I want to specify who is sending it, -h for hops, -a for account, and so on, okay? And then to address at the end. That's the last thing you put in, the to address, right? So that's one option. And as it says, it's an intelligent mail system, blah, blah, blah. The following options are accepted. -a for name, executes an account command, see below for the name, -a for file, and so on. It goes through all those details. Start in disconnected mode, so the description of disconnected, enables debugging messages and disables actual delivery of messages. And let's keep going. Print -h invokes send mail with the specified hop count. This option has no effect with SMTP used for sending mail. And this is the problem. SMTP is what we would normally use to send mail externally, right? Because it's got to go through a mail relay or something like that in order for it to work. We don't have a mail relay option right now the way this is set up. So we'd have to kind of set that up. By the way, we had things like news groups in the past and all this other stuff. But S for subject is important. Again, -T, capital T. And this is 2, so that's one thing. -U for user, reads the mailbox of the given username. -V for verbose, right, as an example, and -V for print mailx's version and exit, so -V. Enable tilde escapes even not in interactive mode with a minus or kind of a dash tilde. It looks like 2 dashes, but actually it's a dash tilde, right? And then it says to send mail to one or more people, mailx can be invoked with arguments and so on. Reading mail, it talks about disposing of mail, specifying messages, but it really doesn't talk about external mail at all. You could try and do it, but like I said, sometimes it's not going to function properly. Did anyone have any success doing it from the class? Did you guys try it out? You could try, like again, I usually don't get much success, and usually it bounces into a junk mail anyway, even if you send it from here somehow, right? So that's really kind of all the details. If you look through the man pages of mailx, again, not really super exciting, but it's just an example of how we can use kind of internet communications locally to communicate. Truly, I would probably have some kind of mail client that I would have in the UI user interface, where you can set up your mail client with your servers and all that kind of stuff, so it can do the proper relay and reception of messages. And for that, you could use, many of us will use things like some kind of cloud-based mail, like for example Gmail or Outlook. Nowadays you can use Outlook as well. But back in the day, they didn't have those things, and you had to use either some kind of user interface installed client or here command line, right? So, but again, you'd probably be connected to some kind of SMTP server, and when you're connected to an SMTP server locally, what ends up happening is it would run. So one thing to do is set up SMTP on our system, because Linux can be an SMTP server, no problem, and then from there, it would relay the messages outside of our environment to an outside email address. For now, we're not going to do that. That might be something we do in the future as we go towards more internet communications. So that stuff is fixed. I wanted to show you how to fix that. Hopefully you guys got that working. Okay, so kind of an internal mail thing. Let's get out of this. Anyone not get it working with those examples? Hopefully you did. All right, so that's one thing. Also, last day, what we did was we talked about VS Code a little bit, and we worked on a a little example of a website that I pulled up. So again, I pulled up VS Code. If you just pull up VS Code from the by default, it'll pull up the last thing that it was looking at. If I want to open up a particular folder, let's say open up a folder, that's what you want to do. Again, you can use Control K, Control O. Let's try that. So if I press Control K, Control O, it'll open up a folder with my keyboard as opposed to by using the file manager. Okay, I mean, actually it'll bring up file manager again, Nautilus. That's what this thing is. That's what it's called, the Nautilus file manager. And I can simply just look in documents by double clicking in my workspace. And this is where I'm working. I'm going to press OK. And you can see now that it's going to launch my workspace alongside two things. Again, in my workspace, this is just, I'm using this just as an editor. And by the way, if you ever see VS Code and it has this little symbol here, it says there's some update. And what you can do is you can download update on Windows machine. Not only will it download, but you can actually restart when it's done. So let's see what it does here with Linux. So again, you can see that there's an update. 1.46 is available. If I click download, and you have to choose RPM because we're using Red Hat, Fedora, or SUSE, one of those three, right? So we download that. And if things go well, then it will download the latest version of VS Code. And here it is. Here it is downloading, right? Now what happens when I'm downloading something, but at the same time I have VS Code open? So what I'm going to do, I'm going to close VS Code for a second. I think this is the safest way to do it. It says, type of file you can harm your computer. Do you want to do it anyway? Of course I do, right? And then what we can do is we can click on this, right? And what it'll do is it'll launch VS Code one more time, all right? So then we can say launch, right? And we should have now the latest version of VS Code. By the way, if you ever have a question whether or not you've got the latest version or not, you can always go to help on VS Code, and you can look at about for the version number 1.45.1. That's the version we just got. And we can also go and check for updates manually yourself. If there is one, it'll come up like this, and it says download update. So you see that it did it, but it didn't do it, right? And I kind of knew it wouldn't, because when I did the download update thing, here's a couple things to note for this one. Let's just close VS Code down for a second. It says launch, right? But if I looked at, I'm just going to keep this screen up for a second. Actually, I won't. If I look at the file manager, so the Nautilus file manager, which is here, here's files, right? And if I go to downloads, you can see that I've got Node and I've got code. 1.46.0 is what we're at. If I was to launch VS Code again, and you can see that that is the case, I've got this, right? So let's just do this again and try it out. So 1.46.0. So if I launch this again, here's VS Code from scratch again. And if I go to help about, right, it's 1.45.1. So you can easily see that the update didn't take, right? So that's definitely, that didn't work, right? Downloading it and installing it for the first time didn't work. Did it work for any of you? How about this, if you tried it? Because there should be an update for you too. Sometimes it doesn't work. So the other thing to do is remove Visual Studio Code, remove it and reinstall. That's definitely another way of doing it. Definitely not my preferred way, but you know, that's definitely a way of doing it. Remember that whenever I want to run an update, first of all, if I go back to software, and if I search for software, you can also search for stuff here, Visual Studio. And you notice that Visual Studio is not something that I can find within my regular software downloads, right? So I can, if I look for installed, and these are all the things, all the software that I've installed, all this stuff. And notice that, again, I don't see via Visual Studio as a piece of software that shows here in my regular software. And updates, of course, if I had any updates, it would check here. Explore, I can explore different things I want to download. For example, on utilities, a lot of times people, especially developers, download things on utilities that they want to download. There's tons and tons of stuff, especially for programmers to download. But ours doesn't seem to be in that boat. You know, we just have under activities. If I click on applications, I do see Visual Studio Code right there, right? So here's Visual Studio Code. I can certainly launch it from here. And like we did before, if I checked the About page, you can see that it's the wrong version. Okay. So how do you run things from an RPM perspective from the command line? So again, talk about running executables. If I go to, so I go to ls, you can see that here's my downloads. If I go to downloads, right, you can see these are the downloads. And you see that some of them are red and other ones are blue. Blue obviously is a something that's been, you know, it's a folder or a directory. But red, well, that's something different. Let's see what the pattern is for red. So if I go ls minus al, it sees, you can see that first of all is red. Look at red. RW, read write, but I can't execute it. I can't like do anything with it from here. I can't like say, okay, do something with RPM, right? If I was to do a dot slash, and then code -1.46.0, and then kind of put in, you know, the rest of it. So 159.170.147.e17.x86. Follow me here for a second. 64.rpm. If I just to do that, that would normally run something, right? But here, you know, the way it's done, if I just type it in, it says no such file or directory, right? And if I click the run command, right, it's a run, like it'll run thing. There is execute would be something else you want to think about using. So let's see what run does. So man run, no manual entry for run, man execute, no manual entry for execute. So it kind of looks at those things. There is no run or execute command for these things, right? So it's not like I can run or execute this thing. It's not something that I can do here the same way, right? So how do I then make use of the RPM? Again, what we did was correct. How about uninstallation? If I want to uninstall, and again, if I was to look at installing code from DNF, so is there a way to download and install Visual Studio Code from DNF, right? Through our package manager, which would be awesome if there was, right? So again, let's look it up. So download VS Code through DNF, right? Let's see if there is something like that. So running Visual Studio Code on Linux, right? It talks about how to do that, right? And it says sudo snap install class -- classic. You can install it by running this, get snap, get it from the snap store. That's what it says to do. You can do it there. Note, if snap isn't available in your Linux distribution, please check the following installed snapd guide, how to do snap, because snap is another installation. Sudo apt install for Debian, right? And here is something, sudo rpm, take a look at this, rpm -- import packages and so on, right? That's from Microsoft, right? And then you can do the sudo dnf install code. And this is really interesting because what this does is it actually allows us to download Microsoft packages directly from here. So let's try this out. So I'm just going to copy this first line. So again, I'm going to press copy. I'm going to go back to my terminal and I'm going to right click here and press paste and press enter. So it's going to ask me for my password. Okay. So that's the first thing. So that basically what it did. What that did was it registered, you know, kind of this distro link is what it is, the Microsoft repository for this. The next part is I want to do this. It says, so look what it says: echo -e, name Visual Studio Code, and then it's HTTPS packages Microsoft. It tells me where to find it, right, in the repo. Okay, so this is the next part I want. So I'm going to grab this whole line. Again, I'm going to press copy, right, go back to my terminal, right, and then paste that big line of code, press enter, and then we're good to go. It did that part. So that part's the next piece. Again, I'm following the instructions online, which is what you should be doing too. Remember, we have the greatest library in the world, which is our internet, right? And now here's the next part. This is interesting because what does this do? Check update. What it does, it checks for update from all the packages that are out there. So I'm going to grab this line of code. I'm going to copy it. I'm going to go back to terminal, and I'm going to paste it. And now what you're going to see what the effect is going to be. It's going to basically go through our packages, and it's, hey, look at this. Visual Studio Code was found. Last metadate expiration. You can see it's found a new package, right? And that's fantastic, right? That says, hey, look, we found a new package for VS Code. That's the one thing that's been updated. And so now what I can do is I can do something that looks like this. So again, copy this one, go back and right click and paste and press enter, and let's see what it does. Let's see if it actually installs VS Code, and it's the latest version. So package code blah blah. Oh man, dependencies resolved, nothing to install. Well, how about if we did an upgrade, right? Remember, sudo, we already have VS Code. This is if you didn't have VS Code. So remember, we can go sudo dnf, right? And then if we want to, first of all, let's do a man page for a second. If you don't know how it works, man dnf, look through. Remember that DNF has a bunch of options. And downgrade, you can do that. We can try other things like reinstall, right? That's something we can totally do. We can also remove VS Code. We can do that because anything that's installed, we can uninstall. We can also upgrade. Okay, let's see if we do upgrade, what happens. So again, sudo dnf upgrade, right? And what we want to upgrade is the last thing we put in, which is code. So let's see if that works. And see if there is an upgrade for code. So it's going to go through the list, right? And it says, hey, look, we found an upgrade for code. Do you want to do this? And the answer is yes. And then it's going to download and install the update for code, and it's going to put it in. By the way, guys, the process that I'm showing you is very typical of most Linux or Windows programmers. You may not know what to do, but you know the biggest library and the best guides are up online, right? So we can look at, hey, now it says it's complete. Let's test it to make sure it's right. I'm not going to launch it from terminal. I'm going to launch it right from our UI to make sure that that's okay. And when we launch Visual Studio Code now, a good indicator that it's been updated is when you get this release notes thing. Once you get release notes 1.4.6, guess what? You know it's been updated. And it says, welcome to the May 2020 release, even though we're in June. By the way, usually it's 1 month behind because what ends up happening is the May release usually is distributed in the first week of June. So anything we've done in May, and Visual Studio Code, that's why I love Visual Studio Code for across all platforms, is it because it's an active project that keeps on getting updated regularly, and more bug fixes and updates across all platforms are released, you know, with the later versions of VS Code. So really awesome stuff. Highly recommend it. So far, it's been kind of the best workflow that I've used. So, and you can look through here and look for kind of latest versions of what's been updated, and it talks about how to, you know, kind of set up GitHub Lite, a bunch of the different things. It kind of has these little animated GIFs to show you how to use it, and a bunch of other stuff. Okay, we don't care about this right now. Thank you very much. But now, if I go to Help, just to make sure, and I go to About, you can see now that it's 1.46.0. This is a good thing. Yay. Questions around updating software. A lot of times there's some kind of version for the distribution of Linux that we're using. In this case, we used VS Code as an example. Okay. Great. A couple of things we talked about also last day. So here's VS Code. We talked about this idea of running an editor, and it doesn't matter whether you're learning JavaScript right now or in the future we're going to do Python together. You're going to use an editor similar to this to run your code, right? And what you want to try and do with the code that you're writing is understand what's happening here. So again, what I talked about last day was this idea of an immediately invoked function expression that you're going to be learning about in JavaScript. Whether you're with me or not, you should know what this is. I created a simple function. Function is a reusable block of code, right? You should know that from like COMP301. And then you can see that there's a little command that it's going to run. So what I'm doing here is I'm waiting for the window to load. Here's my load event, and then when the window loads, I'm going to start this function. So that's what this little thing does. And then of course this won't run. It's JavaScript until I put it inside my index.html. And you see JavaScript, usually what I would like to do is run JavaScript at the bottom. So now we have something to play with, which is what I talked about last week or last day. And I'm going to go back and modify this. We can use other commands that we haven't explored to help us find information about our little code. I'm just going to exit from VS Code for now. Great, so we're back to the terminal window again. And let's review some of the things we talked about. So I went through here and I was showing you guys different kinds of file processing commands and utilities and system status. We tried Finger, we downloaded Finger. And there's also other commands we also showed you. For example, there's stuff on here you can use. But this is a great little resource of different kinds of commands that you can use to kind of connect to other places. For example, mail. We did mail last time. We just stepped through this little guideline and tried to use it. Change your password if you want. We have to know your current password. We talked about that last time. And also things like G++ and GCC. If you're a C++ programmer or a C programmer, you would have kind of an understanding of what this is. And that's it, right? So that's what that is. I'm not going to go into detail about that. Miscellaneous utilities. There's a lot of little miscellaneous things, like for example the calendar app that we talked about, CD. We did all those kind of things. So that's all listed here. Okay, I'm just going to move through this. Okay, so DD is like CP. So DD is, again, it says dissection of what this is. And if you looked at the man pages for DD for a second, so if I go back to our Linux distribution and said man DD, and you can see it says convert and copy a file. Guys, I need to take 1 minute. I'll be right back. I'm just going to pause the require. Sorry, I'm just getting interrupted by one thing, and I'll be right back. Okay, 1 sec. I'll be right back, guys. All right, guys. Sorry about that. Okay, we're back. So DD is a convert and copy file command. It's very similar to copy. Yeah, sorry about that. I went offline for 1 sec. Yeah, so it's very similar to that. What it does is it allows you to convert a file if you need to. Again, I don't use DD very often, but it's definitely an option if you wanted to know how to convert a file as an example. And it gives you options on how to do that. We can convert from one type to another if I wanted to convert something. It's very rare that we'd have to do this, but again, this is kind of a leftover from what we used to use before. Okay, so Control C, I'll quit. So that's this part. DD, so convert and copy. Grep, now this, my friends, this is way more interesting. So it says finds and displays lines contained in a particular search pattern. Okay, so how would we use grep? So again, if I was to go back to this, let's try, we're sitting in downloads. Let's move into the folder that we need to. So I'm going to go up one and then down into Workspace. Let's see if that's a thing. Or sorry, up one, down into Documents, and then Workspace, and then we can see now we're in scripts. I want to look at index.html, and if I go man grep, right, it says, okay, so he's grep, egrep, or fgrep, right? It says print lines that match patterns, right? Match patterns. So, and what it looks like is we have some options, some patterns, and then the file name. Okay, cool. I like that. So that's the one thing. You can say, we can check the version of grep, extended. We can use regular expressions as well as anything that I want to find. It says patterns. Use patterns as the patterns. If the option is used multiple times or is combination with the -f file option, search for all patterns. Given this option can be used to protect a pattern beginning with quotation and ending with a quotation. Okay, so we can do that. Let's try that out. So I want to find something like hello world. So if I go grep index, so again, the pattern we're looking for is next, which is something like hello, right? As an example, I want to look at hello, and we want to look at index.html and press enter. It finds it for us in a couple of spots. So why would I want that? I mean, this is like, you got to think about this. I want to find a file or files that have, hello in them, right? As an example. By the way, I'm looking for a specific file, index.html, and that's why I made this with you. Actually, there's an underlying reason, 2 reasons. I want you guys to start thinking about using VS Code as an editor. If you haven't started using it already inside Linux, the Linux operating system. So that's kind of my underlying reason for it. And the second real reason to do it is we have something to play with, right? So here it found hello in a couple spots. It found hello in the title, and we also found hello inside of our H1, right? Which is hello world. So what do I mean by hello world in the title? How does that work? So again, if I bring up code again, so if I go code, and if I bring up VS Code for a second, just to check this out, you can see that in my index.html, I have hello world without an exclamation mark, which should be with an exclamation mark, in the title, right? So I'm looking for that pattern, right? And it's found it here on line 6 and here on line 10. Yay, right? Awesome. But what if, I'm just going to make a copy of this. So I want to, I love when this happens. VS Code has funny things happening in Linux, I find, especially in a VM environment, right? And it happens sometimes when I'm doing something like this, but I really want to make a copy of this thing, right? It says modified, by the way. M is modified, right? I want to make a copy of this thing from here, to the rest. And there's also edit. So all my menus seem to be messing up right now. Look at edit specifically is messed up. I love this when this happens. I don't know if it's happening to you. Here he goes. So so once this happens, you can see that I can copy, and then I can just simply paste, right? So if I press paste again, it should create a copy of my file, right? Which is what I want. I want to kind of duplicate or copy the file and then paste it in the same spot, right? That's what I want to do. And I want to create a copy, index.copy, right? Index copy. So let's make this something else. Let's call this about HTML, right? So let's do that. So kind of, if you click onto here, you can rename, and let's call this about HTML. So there's two HTML files, an index and an about now, right? And we can call this about in the title, right? But we'll leave inside of our first heading again, we'll leave the same hello world, right? So I'm going to save this. So I have two things, an index and an about. The only difference between the about is the title on line 6 is about. Actually, let's call this about us. There we go. And inside, but on line 10, on both files, whether it's index.html or the about.html, we both have hello world and first heading. Okay. I'm just going to, kind of close this off again. So code is gone. And now I'll do the same grep command, grep, and I want to look for hello, but I want to look for any file that has in HTML. I want to look for all files that have hello in them. Press enter. And now we see a couple things happen. One is about.html, right? You can see that it's here on H1. Doesn't really tell us the location, right? And then index.html, it shows us two places. So this is really useful for me. Grep is amazing to find the pattern in files. Like I want to find which file has a particular thing. Well, this is something that I wish we had on Windows. Something like grep exactly. But you can get that, of course, if you're using Windows. Cygwin or Cygwin for Windows kind of does the same thing. If you want to set up kind of a Linux-like environment, and then you get commands like grep. So for example, on the Windows side of things, if I was to pull up my terminal, which is command prompt, right? I've set it up so that way it's PowerShell, right? So I can do an ls, not here, but let's say if I do a dir, I can't do grep. Grep doesn't really work, right? From this perspective, I don't have this. But if I was going to pull up PowerShell instead, so on the Windows system, PowerShell, right? So here's Windows PowerShell, right? Which is different than command prompt with PowerShell. And if I do an ls here, oh, now I get something like that looks like Linux, kind of working on the Windows side of things, right? Can I even use clear? Yes, I can. I can use clear with Windows PowerShell. Can I use grep? Well, it says it's not really recognized. Why? Because grep isn't something that I've installed. There's nothing like it that I've kind of used in here. But you can definitely install something like grep on the Windows side through Cygwin. Okay, and let me show you what that looks like. And I'm showing you this because some people are like, well, wouldn't it be cool if we had that on Windows? Yeah, it would be. So let me just pull that up. So I'm just going to go to Chrome. And if I was to download, if I was to look at something like Cygwin, what this is it's kind of like a POSIX kind of environment, or like a Linux-like environment for Windows, right? So it's kind of really cool. Something to explore for you guys outside of this course, right? You can take a look. It says it's not a way to run Linux apps. It doesn't do that, but it does make it look very similar to Linux, and a lot of the commands we can use in Linux we can use here in Cygwin. All right, so that's something that I wanted to share with you. But this is really cool. Grep is amazing, and I wish I had it, like I said, on the Windows side native. In fact, I wish I had Linux-like commands on the Windows side native with a lot of the utilities that we have. Okay, so that's what grep does. Really cool. And you can also use regular expressions. You should be learning about regular expressions at some point in your JavaScript course. Okay, there's two. So unique and comm. Okay, so identifies duplicate lines. So if I have duplicate lines, it'll identify those things, if I want to use it. So the comm command. So if I go to comm, let's do man comm. So clear, man comm. And it says comm compare two sorted files line by line, right? So file 1 and file 2, and that's what it does, compare. And what about if I go man unique, right? Unique report or omit repeated lines, right? So that's the other option. So unique finds unique, kind of repeated lines, and and Comm compares two files to see if they're the same. Let's see if there's also a diff, which we're gonna talk about in a second. So if I go unique, and if I look at index.html, then it's gonna look through. Here's index.html, and it'll highlight any lines that are exact same. So right now it looks the exact same, there's nothing that's really unique about it. Everything is unique, is what I mean. But what if let's open up code again. What if by chance I had a duplicate line? So I'm just going to copy this h1 tag and put it right underneath the other one, right? So I got two h1 tags, hello world, and I did that. I did that again, right? So did it not? Oh yeah, it omitted the second one. Notice it didn't even look at the second one because it's identify or omit, and by default it's omit, right? So filter adjacent matching lines from input or writing to output, whatever the output is, with no options. Matching lines are merged to the first occurrence. Okay, so that doesn't really change anything. It's to the output, right? So it'll just remove repeated lines, right? So this one is only print duplicate lines, right? So -d or minus repeated. That's the other option. Minus count is prefix lines by the number of occurrences. So let's try that. So let's do a couple of these. So we'll say that unique, right? -c, and then the name index.html, and then these are one-time lines. Hey, what happened to my index.html? Did it not save? Maybe it didn't. Code. Because I thought I had it in there, but who knows? Yeah, totally did that. And so that's, this is the count. And let me just go unique again. So man unique. To go in there, and you can see -d only print duplicate lines. Let's try that one. So -d. So unique -d, and then index.html, and it says there's no repeated lines, which is kind of weird because there is a repeated line. So somehow I didn't find my my repeated line, which is kind of weird. It should totally have found that. I think it's omitting it automatically. It's not even showing it the first time, which is kind of a weird thing. All right, the other one is I want to compare two files. So I want to go comm, I want index.html and about.html, and it's going to look at both of them. So it says file 2 is not in sorted order, file 1 is not in sorted order, right? So it says comm input is not in sorted order. Okay, so what did I do? I went index.html and about. I don't think that's what it means if I went about and index. I don't think that's what it means, right? See, that's not the thing that it's talking about. I think it's talking about more in terms of what's in there. Let's do a man on comm and see what it says. It says compare sorted files. Okay, so these files are not sorted, that's for sure, right? When file 1 or file 2 is not both, is read standard input with no options, produces 3-column output as an example. -1 suppresses column 1, and so on. And it checks the order that the input is correctly sorted, even if all the input files are pairable. So this is not a great comparison. But what if we use diff instead? So this is cool, but what if we said something like, what's diff? So diff, it compares files line by line. It says mandatory arguments to long options are mandatory for short options too. And then it says Q, we want to do a brief. S, report identical files, right? -C, as an example, the lines of copied context, -U, and so on. Let's just use diff by itself and see what happens. So we'll say diff file 1 and file 2. We'll say about.html and an index.html. And then it looks at a couple of files, a couple lines, right? And it shows us where the differences are. So it says, hey, here's our title, right? And you can see that less than means that the file doesn't have that, So for example, index.html does not have, because we're saying compare about HTML with index.html. It's almost like here's what we're looking to, this is the file we care about. This is the file we're comparing it to, right? So we're saying it doesn't have, less than means it does not have an about us title. Index.html does not have that. Greater than says that HTML, this index.html has a title that says hello world. So that means greater than. It contains something that the first file doesn't. Okay? And then less than says that it's missing an h1 tag. Well, that's really weird because we know both of them have the same things, but one file has the exact has one extra one than the other one, right? So that's the one thing it has. So if I was going to go back to the original state of affairs, which is not duplicating this line, and we ran that test again, right? So this, oh, haha, you guys didn't even tell me that was happening. It's in about, yeah, you did. I should have checked it. Okay, so let's go back. So if I was to put this one in here, damn, I checked this in input. I was like, I got both of them running. Yes, so if I did this, let's go back. That makes sense now. Okay, so let's go back, and I was like, that doesn't make sense. If I was to do this same thing, you can see now that I just ran it again. So let's try that. Let's just clear the screen so I can make that more apparent. Oops. Yes, this is what I was looking for. So, so now that we do it, it says, okay, we're missing this, but you have this, and plus index.html has an extra one of these. That's what it shows, right? Whereas before it was missing one of those. Okay. Now let's see if we can do unique. So unique of index.html, whew, right? There's unique. And if I was to go, and notice it doesn't show the other one, that's good because it omits the duplicates. But if I go unique minus D for index.html, I was like getting worried there for a second. It shows you the duplicate. That's the duplicate line. That's what I was expecting for the output to be. Thank you for that. That was okay. So yeah, does that make sense? All right, so really cool. And so this is kind of like some stuff that it compares. I can also diff is an amazing utility again because it kind of compares two files and tells me what the difference is between one and the other, which is what we did already. So that's the difference between COM. And COM does a sorted list. So I think unique and diff are really cool. Grep looks for a specific pattern. All right, so really cool stuff. All right, let's go back to this, to our this, and just get rid of this extra line. We don't need this. By the way, we added an about page, and notice on the left here, it's showing me that my source control has 2 pending changes, right? I'm talking about GitHub again. It has 2 things, 2 changes. One, I've modified index.html because I added a hello world, I added an exclamation mark to the hello world, and the about.html is new completely. So M is modified, U is update, so it's a new or untracked, right? So what I want to do is I want to track both these changes. I can do it through my GitHub UI here inside VS Code, or I can simply go back to the command line and do that. Let's do the command line. I'm just going to close VS Code again. I could do it in the terminal that's integrated, but I'm not going to. Again, I'm going to clear the screen, and I can do a Git Status, right? Git Status shows the exact same stuff. Remember we talked about Git as a version control system, and I'm going to go into more about Git. I'm just showing you how to use Git, and then I'm going to talk about Git a little more. It's going to be a little bit backwards, but you get to understand why I'm talking about the way I'm talking about it in a bit. Okay, so here's, it tells me my branch is up to date with origin master, right, as an example. If I did there's a command called Git Fetch, and what it does is going to go up online and see if there's anything new on my current branch. If I did a Git Status now, again, you're going to see that my branch is up to date with origin master, but you can see that I have some files that have been updated locally. I can also do a Git Log. It shows me the last command, the last commit that I did. This is, remember, commits are just snapshots of my local files, right? That's what that is. If I want to push this up to GitHub now, I can just say Git Push, but I can't push something that I haven't committed. I have a bunch of changes. I want to stage those changes. I want to mark them as I want to track those files. So the first thing is when I say git add dot again. So git add dot. What it does, it tracks the files. If I do a git status now, you can see I've got two files that I'm starting to track. One, which is a new file, and the other one, which is a modified file. Index.html has been modified. About.html is a new thing that I just added. And now I need to make a commit. So git commit minus m for message, and then the name of the commit. So I'll say, and it's got to be a friendly name for what I changed. This is the new snapshot. I added about.html. Again, this is for me to do and you to watch. I want you just to understand the workflow right now, and then we're going to actually do more of a lesson around version control. All right, so I've added this new commit. Okay, so here's a new commit, and if I do a clear again and I go git status, you can see it says your branch is ahead of origin master by one commit. Your branch. This means the local branch, right? The branch that's here, right? Origin master is a remote. What does this mean? Am I confusing you guys? Probably. Let's draw a diagram to make you guys understand. I'm just going to pull up Sketchbook Pro. Whoa, I've got a really cool sketch, but nothing to do with you guys. Let's pick a new sketch here. So what is Git, and what am I talking about, and what is version control? Well, let me do a little bit of a demonstration of what it is. So can you imagine where you have your files? So let's suppose, I'm just going to make this so it's black. Let's suppose you have your, undo. Let's suppose you have your computer. Here's your computer monitor, and you have your keyboard. Let's say here's your keyboard, your computer monitor, and you have a folder. Here's your folder, and there's a bunch of files, and we're going to mark these files off with a bunch of straight lines. So these are some files, and what you want to do is you want to, kind of somehow take a snapshot of these files, right? Because what can happen is, what if my computer just powers down right now, and I can lose my work, or let's say a good example of this is I'm working with a folder, I'm developing some software or something, and then what ends up happening is my VM blows up or something, right? So I lose my stuff. So what Git is a version control system, and really there's three reasons to use version control. I'm just going to put them down here. The first one is backup. So reason number one is backup. And I'm going to ask you, by the way, these are the three reasons I might ask you about why to use Git and GitHub on a quiz. Hint, hint, next week. The second reason that I want to use GitHub, not Git. So this is backup is definitely for Git and GitHub. I'm going to make this larger in a sec. You're going to see. So let's not make it 8. Let's make it something like 14. There we go. So, so the first reason is backup, and that works for Git. That's local. And GitHub, which is remote. And we'll talk about that in a second. The second reason is really version control. So sometimes, have you ever had this issue where you're working on a piece of code, let's say for COMP301 or some other course that you're working on, it just worked and now it doesn't. And you don't know why it didn't work, right? So what you can do with Git and GitHub is you can revert back to a previous version, a previous snapshot of your code, right? Similar to what we do with Windows when we take a kind of a snapshot in Windows. We take a snapshot where we, before we update the software in Windows, it allows you to take a snapshot, right? So version control, again, this is really for both Git and GitHub again, right? So backup, but I want to mention that backup, if you just back up locally with Git and your machine burns, goes on fire, as an example, it doesn't save your files. It's only locally on your machine, right? If you put it on both Git and GitHub, then even if your machine burns or if you're in a new environment, you can always download your files in that new environment if it's up on GitHub. And I'll talk about what GitHub is in a sec. Version control, Git and GitHub, you can always revert back. And the third reason why you'd want to use, GitHub is really collaboration. And that's really mainly on GitHub. Okay, you can do it with Git, but GitHub or other types of cloud providers, they allow you those things through. So those are the three reasons why you want to use Git and GitHub. And I can put those reasons up here. So kind of these are the 3 reasons why you want to use GitHub. And let's just title that off. Top 3 reasons to use Git and GitHub. Okay. And by the way, this is for anybody, for Linux. This is for if you're going to be a programmer, you know, with Python or whatever you're going to do. These are the good reasons to use it. So you've got your files here. This is, let's say, your folder. You've got a bunch of files in your folder. And what you want to do is those 3 commands. So if the first command is git init, that's the first command, right? What this does is it initializes Git or a Git, what we call repository, right, on your system. So that's what it does, the first command, okay? And we'll just make this a little bigger so you guys can see that. So git init initializes your Git repository. We'll make this like bold if we can, maybe not. And then the next command is git add. And git add, you can do 2 things. You can specify a single file, or you can specify all files in the current workspace. So I usually use git add dot. Dot says is like a wildcard, and it adds all files. Okay, that's what it does. So this is add all files in the workspace to the staging area. All right, this is a staging area, and think about the staging area as almost like I'm gonna make a commit, but I haven't made a commit yet. Okay. That's what that does. So git add dot, that is the command. And then the third command to get going is git commit, right? We just did that. Git commit -m for message. And then the friendly message would be something like, if you did this for the first time, you would use initial commit, like we did last week or last day, or first commit. Okay. And what this does is a name for the snapshot. I'll say snapshot like this, of your files. All right, so it's almost like we named the snapshot. That's the commit. Okay, so that's the third thing you do. And then when you put it up on GitHub for the first time, so these are the 3 commands. Let me put these are all local commands, right? So if I do this, and we'll put this kind of over here, these are the commands. You can see this. And what this does, it sets you up for a local repository, right? So and let me just do smash all those layers together. Yeah, cool. So what this is, you can think about this as a undo. Tools. And I don't want to do that. Well, let's actually do this, but then I can move this around. Can I move this around? No, not that. Damn it. Undo. I meant to do something like that looks like this. Yes. So this is your local environment, okay? So this is kind of, that's what this is, this part right here. So this, I'm just gonna make a little leader line here that goes like this. And that's your local environment, right? Local environment. And that, what I mean by local environment is it's trapped in your machine, right? So this is not something that you could take with you. It's just, you know, here, right? And what happens is anything you do here, well, if something goes wrong with your machine, your machine blows up or whatever, you lose your files, okay? But back in the day, there's different kinds of version control systems. I'm just going to draw this one. And what there was is there's a need for you to put in this really ugly cloud that I'm making. There's the need to put up your files in the cloud. Some are off-site or outside of your local machine, right? So there's a bunch of providers. One of the most popular one nowadays is called GitHub, which is a cloud provider. We'll call it cloud service provider. That's kind of what it is. And what the cloud service provider does, this is allow you to store your repositories offline up here. Now, GitHub originally was kind of its own company. But recently, maybe you've heard, but it's been bought by Microsoft. So GitHub is owned by Microsoft. But it's the most popular way of sharing files, backing up files, doing version control, all that kind of stuff that exists today. I think it's the most popular way of doing that, putting up on GitHub. When you go to an interview, they may ask you, hey, show me your GitHub repo. I want to understand kind of the stuff that you've been working with, and they'll show you how to do that. Okay, so kind of GitHub. What we want to do is somehow connect to this repository. And then think about this repository is not like Google Drive. It's not like I have direct access to these folders, this repo that's up here. So the repository, and this is the repo, is what it's usually called, repository, right? This repository that's online, it's not like I can go in there and modify things directly. I have to push to this repository, and for that we need something called a remote connection, right? So what I want to do then is I want to create a remote between my local environment and the cloud service provider. This remote, like a little lifeline, I'm gonna make it a double thick, right, so you can see what this is. Here's the double line, right? This is called a remote. Okay, here's the remote. Maybe we could even rotate it around and get fancy. Sure, so much fanciness. This remote, right, is just a connection, right? And this remote normally has a name, and then the default name for your remote is called origin, unless you name it something else. That's just what the system names it by default. Okay. However, darn it. Let's try that again. Woo. Oh yeah. Origin. There we go. Playing with tools. And so it's the origin remote, right? And what this does is it's this connection string that uses the GitHub repo's URI, a unique identifier for the repository, and it lists that information inside the hidden.git folder that we saw last week inside of your folder structure. Okay, that's the origin remote. Whenever we want to send something to GitHub, which is sometimes we know it as an upload. We don't have really an upload. We're going to do a push. All right, so we push through the origin remote into the repo into something called the master branch. So by default, the master branch is where we send everything. Okay, and again, this is a very high level view of GitHub. It's not a complete kind of tutorial on how to use Git and GitHub. But the master branch, you have many branches here. You can have multiple, call them lines of development, if you will. And every time we make a branch, we make a copy of the original branch that it came from. And so we can work on a separate branch. For example, I may not want to work on the master branch. I might have a bug to fix in my code, and I'd rather work inside of a bug fix branch. Or I might have a feature that I'm adding, and before I mess with the master branch, because other people might be using it, I might make a feature branch. Right? But suppose that we just have one branch for a second and I want to push to the master branch. The way to do that is I'm going to push to it across the origin remote. So this the same up in the up direction. So this is the direction I'm pushing towards, right? And this is called a push. Okay? And by the way, I'm sure you guys can figure out the next command, because we kind of, I think I already did that, but maybe not. So if I want to share my files with another user, and they've already created a repository, and now that repository, as an example, has the same files that are on their local machine. You know, so let's say, for example, I have several files here now, kind of the same pattern that I have on my local machine here, and I want to get those files, or maybe they've added their own files, mess with the code, whatever, and I want to get the latest version of their code. I can do the opposite of a push, which is a pull. So I can kind of pull down from GitHub into my local repository, and that is called a pull. Okay? I know, really exciting words, but so for now, that's all I want you to think about when we do GitHub. I want to, kind of create a, I want to create a initial repository, add stuff, commit, and then I want to push to my master branch. If every time I add or do more files, let's say I add another file, I'm going to repeat the last two steps, git add and commit. Okay, so this is what I'm going to repeat. I'm going to kind of repeat these two steps. Let's see if I can actually do this. Yay! Over and over again. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do right now. I've kind of git add dot git commit. And once I've repeated those steps, then I want to do a git push, right? And that's the next thing that I need to do. And the way it looks is Git Push, right? And then, across the origin remote into the master branch. That's what that line means. Okay, so I'm gonna grab this one and put that here. So this is something I need to do. Git push origin master, right? But before that, I need to establish what excuse me, what the origin remote is, which we've already done last week. Okay, or last day. Okay, so that's kind of what I want to do. The origin remote, and if let me just undo that change for a second. Really, what we want to do is we want to say something like git remote add origin. We name it, and then the name of the remote would be something like https, right? // and then github.com / the name of my my account. The name of my account, which would be like, I don't know, in this case it's Centennial College, right? And then / the name of my repo, which is in this case COMP301 -M2020, and then I think it was like less than three .git. Okay, so that is what it looks like when I did it the first time. So that is something that I need to put in when I establish the name of my remote, and then I can do a git push. And for the first time, I do git push -u origin master, which is kind of like an unconditional push, kind of. All right, that's what that is. So what I want to do going forward is I want to git add, git commit, and then git push. That's the next one I do over and over again. So git add, git commit, and then git push. And let me just draw another line there after I've flattened the file. So git commit, and then from here I want to do a git push. We don't do the oops, I didn't quite do it. We don't do the git remote anymore. It's already been done. So git add, git commit, git push. Those are the three commands. Clear as mud. Hopefully you guys got that. The audio went off. I'm so sorry. Hopefully it's going to be able to capture what I did. It'll catch up. All right. So again, just recap. Three top reasons to use Git in GitHub: backup, version control, collaboration. Okay. Those are the top 3 reasons, and then we do these commands to set up: git init, git add dot, git commit -m, git remote. These are configuration, and we send up our files to the origin remote for the first time with this git push command. All right, and then every single time we update our files, we do a git add dot, a git commit with a new message, what we just added or changed, and then we push it to the origin remote. Okay, so that's where we are right now. Are we there so far? It's on now. Good, thank you. So if I go back then into our files, and of course this is just time me out. That's okay. So we have one commit, but I want to push it. So I do git push origin master, and when I do that, it's going to say, hey, login. What's my username? That's my username, my password. Oh, I keep forgetting my password. And if I did it properly, it's going to push everything else up to the origin. So the origin remote, which is my branch. Notice it says exactly what I said. This is the actual remote to github.com. So with an HTTPS, secure HTTP is what that is. Centennial College, COMP301, M2020, less than 3.git. Because that's where it pushes to. That's the remote it's pushing into. And now, when I do a git status, it's going to say your branch is up to date with origin. So we're kind of in line, in sync. And if I wanted to look at my log, you can see that I have 2 commits, right? My first commit is this one before, right? My initial commit, this is my first commit. You can also call this first commit. And then this is the new thing that I made, which is basically keeping track of my files. Yay? I know it's long-winded, but you guys need to know how to do this, because in the second half of semester, I'm going to ask you guys to keep track of everything with Git and GitHub. It's coming. Questions around Git and GitHub, guys, before we continue? So this is a great workflow for us, right? One way of doing it is we update our files and then we push things up to Git and GitHub. You should try and practice some of this yourself. Again, resources, if you wanted to find resources on how to do some stuff like this, and it's been recorded, which is a great thing. I don't need this anymore. If you go to Up Online, like we said before, so let's bring up our Chrome again, just one sec. And where we went the first day, which was git-scm.com, git-scm.com. If you go there, git-scm.com, you'll notice that there is a free book, Git Pro Git, which is up online for you. You can always hit documentation on how to use Git. Highly recommend doing at least Git Basics, right, which is very, very small. I think it's amazing to work with teams, and it talks about what is version control over here as well. It's a little video, and it's free. All that stuff is free, and it's up here on git-scm.com. These are new. It's something that we've been wanting for a long time, and I think these guys have really done a great job in explaining how to use Git and GitHub. I'm not sure if it's Microsoft inspired or whatever, but really cool stuff. And the book that they offer here is an online book that you can go through and understand how to use Git, a short history of how to use Git, or what is Git, and so on. Okay, so really, really good stuff. Please, as homework, I would recommend you look at this for next week. And there may be, hint, hint, some questions around what are the 3 top reasons why I want to use Git and GitHub on your quiz next week. You might get that. Okay, and you should know what that is. All right, so questions for me about Git and GitHub. All right, so let's get back to it. So again, and isn't it interesting that my background went to like black? That wasn't really my plan, by the way, for my background to go black, but it is what it is. Okay, so yeah, I mean, I think this is cool, right? I've got my Git and GitHub, and if I go to, again, I'm going to go to Documents, and then Workspace, right? You can see that that's what I have there. I want to be able to do some more commands in these things, so let's continue. So we've talked diff, comm. Let's talk about, it talks about how to do a diff between the files. You can say it gives you some examples here, zoo1 and zoo2. We kind of covered that stuff in detail. Okay, WC is not the washroom command. Okay, it's not. It basically calculates the line, word, and byte count of a file. This is pretty important, especially when you have a, kind of a requirement to hand in. Let's try this out. So if I go back to here, and if I go WC index.html, it's going to say, so file, so this is, again, like it says here, go back to this. It says there's 3 things it shows, right? The line count, the byte count, and the word count, okay? So, again, let's do a man. So man, so word, it says how many words do you think it is, how many lines do you think it is, and in which order. So my man WC, right? And then it says prints new line, words, and bytes. And that makes more sense, right? Because you can see bytes were much bigger than words or lines. So this is how many lines we have in our file, how many words we have in our file, how many bytes we have in each file. So, okay, lines, 14 lines, right? How many words, how many bytes? Okay, so kind of interesting. And that's another way of comparing one file to the other, right? Because if I do something like, wc about.html, you can see that we have the same number of lines, but a different byte count, right? Same number of words too, right? But slightly different because about us instead of hello world, right? About us is slightly shorter than hello world, and that's why the byte count is slightly different. So kind of another way of comparing one file to the other, and also understanding the size and what those things mean. So that's WC, and it talks about how to do that. So translating characters, I'm not going to talk about this. I'm going to go on to the next one. The PR command, again, what it does, it provides pagination. All right, pagination basically allows you to stop the page, you know, as an example. So it kind of shows you some stuff. So if I go back to this, sometimes I have a very long file, right? I go man PR. So it converts it for printing. Again, like we said last time, you and I don't print stuff typically. We usually share things through PDF and digital formats, but back in the day, this is a requirement, and this is another little utility that allows us to break up our pages so that they're in a printable format. Okay, so again, I'm not going to do that one. The find command. Okay, so I want to search for files with a specific name. I can use find. Let's try this out. So I say I want to find index.html. There it is. For example, what if I wanted to find app.js, right? It says no such file or directory, app.js. But what if I said find, you know, workspace slash, you know, app.js. I meant find scripts app.js. I'll be okay. And then you can see that it does exist. It basically fires back if it exists or not, right? But what if I said the same thing instead of app.js? I want to find app2.js. It's going to say app2.js doesn't exist in that directory. So you can actually search for a directory. But I mean, you might think like, why do I need this if I can do an ls? But what if it's a really long directory and there's lots of files? Like right now we have one file, so it's not a great case. But if I wanted to find a specific file, if it was in that directory, I could do so by going through this. Find is very powerful because I'm going to do a man find for you. So it does a couple things. It says -H, -L, and -P options control the treatment of symbolic links, right? So -P never follows symbolic links. -L follows symbolic links. Yeah, okay, cool. -H do not follow symbolic links, right? And who cares about that right now? But here's the other stuff that you really care about. -O level enables query optimization, right, to find stuff. So how fast it returns stuff to you, basically. And then different optimization levels. And then it talks about other operators. But the reason why it's very, very powerful is because, especially if you want to find a specific file and you want to know that it's in a spot without doing a manual search, it's really great. And a lot of times you get caught, especially when you're working in this environment where you don't know if the file's in existence in a specific spot, right? So that's fine. Next, cat we've used last time. We want to concatenate. Paste. So we've done a copy. So it's kind of like, and it's different than cat, okay? It's different than cat. Cat is like I concatenate or I move things into a file through that pipe operator, you know, which is what we've been using. So it combines the content of one or more files to the output, to the screen, or to another file. And by default, the pasted results appear in columns separated by tabs. Okay, this is not useful for us in this case because what it would output for us in this case would be something like this. If I want to, if I have two files, one of them is vegetables and the other one is some kind of bread. So this is, you know, kind of or toppings or whatever, or ingredients, and this is the bread that I'm going to use, right? And then what I can do is I can move one to the other. I can paste vegetables and bread into food, right? That's what I do. Just take two files, vegetables and bread, and then kind of send them into food, a food file. And if the food file doesn't exist, it'll create it for you. And then what it'll do is it'll, if you do cat food, so you want to see what food is on the main kind of output, you'll see that vegetables are on one side in a comma separated fashion, and food and the bread is on another side. Now, if we try to do that with our files, it doesn't make any sense. But let's see what happens. So again, you can see that I have about HTML and index.html. Let's make a garbage.html. So we'll say something like, and let's try and combine them like we did before, right? So we'll say paste. I want about.html and index.html. This would be really funny and ugly. Into something like into garbage.html, because that's what it's going to turn out to be, garbage. And if I did a cat garbage, if I can spell properly. And you can see it's going to try and put it in some kind of column separated order. And of course, it's way too wide from my machine. And even if I made this wider, you wouldn't be able to see it. However, what does it look like in the file? That would be interesting to see. So code. Again, it's going to have that extra file in there. So here's garbage. And yeah, it did it, but it kind of did it in a weird way. That's why it's called garbage, because it really doesn't make any sense. One thing in Visual Studio Code, if I want to delete it, I can just right click here and just delete, and then it would just move to trash. Bye-bye. So we don't care about that garbage file, but that's what it does. It takes two files, puts them together. This is great for things like if I have two pieces of data and I want them to be in column separated order. That's what this is really great for. Okay. Paste. All right. How are we doing with time? We're not gonna hit everything. Cut kind of does the same thing. It cuts it from one file, puts it into another. This isn't that bad. So it'll kind of put it'll take one file and put it into another. So here's an example. So I paste vegetables into bread and meats into food. Yay. And then what I want to do is I want to cut, right, as an example with a little bit of an option, right, into food. And what it does is, it will give you the, this is like the column 2 basically. It'll take all the stuff that's in there and it'll only put the things that you want into food. Okay. So kind of another way of cutting a piece out and putting it in there. By the way, we got to remember what this was, why we had all these little functions. There was no UI at the time, right? So we didn't have UI. We just had commands to do stuff, right? Okay, this is interesting. Sorts the contents of a file by individual lines, right? So again, in our example, not a great example because we have in HTML files. But what if, as an example, I had a bunch of data. So let's make a data file. So again, we're going to make a touch. We're going to call this data. Remember what touch does is it creates or modifies a file. Touch data. We'll call it data. And by the way, if we want to rename, how do we rename again? We want to move data to data.txt, let's say. And then if we do a ls-al, you can see that now we have a data.txt. We've renamed it. The file length is 0. We don't have anything in there. Let's do another code. Go back in there. So here's our data, and data is empty. Let's put some random stuff in here. We'll put some names in there. So we'll say Tom, and we'll go Albert, Mike, John, Bob, Sandy, Lily. I'm making random names up. We'll use Roxanne again. Roxanne, right? And then, like that, we have a list of names. And I want to take this and I want to sort it and put it into another file. Let's save this one. Right? So now we'll exit out of here and use the sort command. So we'll say we want to sort data.text. And remember how the command goes? So sort the first file, and we want to pass it into the second file as an example. So sort file and to sort into file 2. And what I want to do is I want to call this sorted data. Let's call this pass it into sorted data. We'll make it an underline data.text. Let's say like this, and press enter. And now let's see what we get. So if I go back to code, it'll bring up VS Code again. And let's look at what sorted data looks like. So this is that one, and let's look at sorted data. You can see now it's in sorted order. Nice and easy. That's a nice little function on the command line. Okay. Now, what if I want to see both files next to each other? Well, VS Code does something very interesting. It allows us to split the editor into, so I can look at now wherever I'm clicking, I can change. So this would be the unsorted list if I click on data. And this is the sorted list. You can see that's two files. You can compare them side by side. Okay, so that's what originally list was, and this is the new list. Okay, let's get out of here. So data and sorted data, and that's what the sort command is. So kind of I think that's a pretty useful command, especially when you have some data that you want to sort, and you don't want to do it with an algorithm. You don't want to do it in code. You want to do it on kind of like in the command line. Again, really useful stuff that Linux gives you, you know, from the get-go. So it gives you some examples here on how to do that. Script files. When we make a script file, we're going to need to do script files in the future. We need to make them executable. So we need to use the chmod command. And by the way, some weird stuff happened with our quiz. Some of you put the answers to, there's a question about how to use the octal version of the chmod command or chmod command. You know, and some of you put the right answer, but the quiz didn't pick it up. So again, just be patient with me as I'm going to go through all of the quizzes, like I said last time, and correct all the issues. So if people have a problem with the quiz again, don't worry. I'm going to go through and remark everything after everyone's done their quiz, okay, which will happen probably earlier next week. All right. So it talks about how to do that, and once we make a you know, a script file, we can make a script file that does stuff. And notice what we can do is in a script file, this is a very, very high level way of doing it. In the script file, what you have is hashtags are things that the script file will ignore. And then what we can do is we can run the script file by making it executable, right? So the first thing is, you know, let me go back to that for a second. So we run it or execute it by doing a / and the name of the script. Okay, so let's try that really quick. This is a quick example. We'll go into more details about shell scripting later, all right? But let's do that. Let's make a little script that does something. So again, what I want to do is I want to go into code. Let's make our script first, okay? And we're going to call this a batch file. We'll call it a batch file. It's simple. We can make it. We can call it whatever we want. I don't want it both. I don't want both these views. So I can get rid of it by just getting rid of one of the files, or just Xing out of this. By the way, up here, notice it says open. I can close all editors. These are all different editors that I have open here in tabs. I can close them up, and I can add a new file. So here's a new file. I want to call this batch file. Okay, not bath file, batch file. My batch file is my script, okay? And what do I want to do? I want to, when I run the file, I want to delete my sorted data file, okay? So let's try and do that. So I'm going to say that I'm going to put a hashtag, this batch file as an example. Can I spell batch finally? Removes the sorted data .txt file. All right, so that is kind of a little comment. You can do that with a hashtag. That's the default for Linux. And then what I can do is actually do the command. So I'll say remove sorted data.txt. Okay, so that's the actual command. So the first command is the hashtag. Anything with the hashtag, it says it's just literally going to ignore this line. That's what the comments are. It's a comment, right? And then the second line actually executes the command. But we have to make this file executable. And we're going to do that on the command line. Let's do that. So I'm going to go back here and clear. And we're going to say that, remember how we did this before? We used chmod. And I want to make it executable for all users. So I want to make it readable and writable and executable for all users. So with a quick way to do that, can anyone tell me what the quick way of doing that with an octal command is? Chmod followed up by something that makes it completely thank you. You should got it right. So it is, again, chmod, and I want to use 777, and then the file that I want to modify, which is my batch file, right? So now remember, if batch file doesn't exist, let me go back to this for a second. So batch file is what it's called, right? So again, I want to do chmod 777 batch file. It'll change the way batch file looks to green, like this. And then for me to run that file, I just have to put // in front of it, // batch file. And if I did everything right, then it would run. And we can check that because look, we have a sorted data.txt. And now if I do an ls, sorted data.txt does not exist, right? It's gone because it's executed that command, right? So the great thing about this is that, sorry, I've got another question. In my title slide, can I give you my YouTube link? Sure, you can do that. But I need to actually see your title slide. I'd rather you put that up on in your assignment. So what this does is it executes all the commands. So where would this be really useful? Well, if I wanted to do a batch of commands, that's why I called it batch file, right? That kind of does everything at once. For example, instead of it deleting the sorted data, it deleted the raw data. Let's name this raw data. Move data.txt to raw data.txt. Okay. Right. You can see now it's called raw data. Move. Remember, it moves and or renames if I move it in the same spot. Right. And then if I do code, and let's change that batch file. So now, what it's going to do. Here's batch file. Instead of the batch file removes the sorted data, the batch file will remove the raw data file, text file. Let's put another list. And, actually what it'll do is it will, let's do the first thing. So this batch file will sort the raw data.txt file and create pipe the result into a sorted data.txt file, right? And then it will remove the raw data file, right? Because that makes sense, right? So first it takes the sort, it sorts it, puts it in sorted data, and removes raw data. So instead of removing sorted data, we want to do a couple things. We want to do two commands, right? We're going to say sort, right, raw data.txt, pipe it into sorted data.txt, and then we want to remove raw data. That makes sense, right? Because we want to make it more of sorted data. We can also make a backup copy, right? If you want to, like, it does it, removes it, or renames it. You can call it old data, right? That's other something we can do. Like, so we can say removes it. Instead of removing it, we can move it, right? So that might be even more, a little bit better. We'll call it old data, right? So we know it's been sorted, right? So instead of removing the old file, we can just call it something else, or even move it somewhere else, like actually copy it or move it into another folder, right? Like another folder altogether for archive, right? So before we get there, let's save this, and I'll show you the more complicated operation, because this is easy to understand what it does, right? It'll just literally follow both those two lines of code. But what if we had another folder? So again, let's make a new folder, make directory, and we'll call the directory into archive, right? So you can see now we have a directory called archive and a directory called scripts, right? And what the batch file will do is if you run the batch file, it'll take the raw data, sort it, create a sorted data folder, and move the raw data into the archive folder and rename it as old data. Let's try that. Okay, so pretty simple stuff. We'll learn more about scripting again later on, like I said. So batch file will sort the data file, pipe it into sorted data file, and then it will move, let's say move the raw data file into the archive folder and rename it to old data.txt. Okay, so in order for me to do that, what would be the command, guys? So sort it, we made it, and instead of remove, we're going to move raw data.txt to where /, right, archive / and then the name of the new file, old data.txt. Does this make sense for everybody? Just waiting to see what you guys think. I think it makes sense. Let's see if it works. Okay, so I'm gonna get out of this, and let's try this out. We'll say /batch file. Boom. Right? We don't know. We have nothing that we have nothing to say that we've done anything, right? And let's do an ls. You can see now that there's just sorted data. Raw data is gone. Let's look inside of archive. You can see that we have old data in there. So it actually did what I wanted to do. But wouldn't it be nice if we got some feedback? And I know we're running out of time, guys. Give me a few more minutes. But these are the commands I wanted to mostly hit with you guys anyway. Let's go to code for a second. So yeah, we have this data. So here's inside of archive. We have old data. We didn't get rid of it. We have it. And I want to do some output, right? So we can do that with echo, right? So we can say echo sorting data, right? And we can do that with some quotations. Let's see if we just say sorting data. And then we can also echo moved raw data to archive. By the way, you have to be careful with the slashes, right? To archive old data.txt. So we'll say raw data.txt. To old data.txt. We'll save this one and we'll move this back. We'll move old data back into our. I'm just going to drag and drop it over here. You can do that. Move. And we'll just rename this. Oops. If it allows me to edit. This is like the VM stuff, the killer VM things. They're supposed to allow you to do, but it's just behind because of my memory usage and my. There we go. Whew. Okay. Rename old data to raw data. So we're back to normal again. Save everything, get out of this. So now if we do an ls command, you can see that we still have raw data in here. Our archive is empty. We have sorted data and a new batch file. Let's run that batch file and let's see if we get some output like we think we're going to get. /batch file. Sorting data, move raw data to blah, 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 blah. So we see that there's an output. And we told the user what to do. The echo command, what it does is it sends output to the command line. That's what it does. Even if we do it here, if I say echo, hello world, right? It'll just say hello world. You can do that anywhere. And we usually use echo inside of the batch file just like this, especially when the batch process takes a while, right? If we're doing a lot of little operations. Whew. Questions around anything that we've covered today. Again, there's some interesting stuff in here too. We talked about scripting. We're going to go more into scripting later. Disk usage talks about disk use utilities. Again, for us, not really that critical because we're not running a real machine. But this is something for you to look at. It may also be on your up on your quiz for next week. Next week's quiz will be released on Tuesday. And I'll also release assignment 2 on Tuesday because I want to get to assignment 2. And it also talks about other things in here, like, for example, the top command. We did that already last day. It also, uptime, tells you how long your operation has been running. Free, how much space is free. Top and free are kind of good to use. Process ID, we can also kill processes. We're going to do that again. If I want to kill a process that's run its course, we'll do that in the second half of semester when sometimes Linux or Python processes are running and it's we've run an endless loop or something. We need to kill a process. A lot of times we'll do that with using the process monitor. You can also engage a process in the background, right, by using the ampersand. We talked about that last day. So these are the things that I've run into. Touch command we did like day one, and the kill process spelling, we can check spelling. There's a built-in spell check. Again, not really that useful for us nowadays with UI. We've compared files before, but this actually compare files and checks to see if they're different. It doesn't tell you where it's different. It just tells you that it's different, which is kind of cool. Archiving it on CD and DVD, we never do anymore. Typically, zipping and unzipping, we can definitely use gzip, which is a very popular utility, or zip and unzip. Also, xz and unxz is another way, as well as tar. So all these different things: zip, unzip, gzip, gunzip, xz, and unxz. These are all compression methods. Most of the time, guys, we use a UI nowadays. But however, sometimes we need to use these things, and you can see that there's a list of commands here on how to get this done. It's very simple. If we have something that's zipped, we can just unzip it by just using unzip and then the file name. So it'll unzip it and create its own folder. There's also additional information on the man page on how to do that. And there's also dump, but we don't need to use that right now, and restore. Again, nice information, but I'm not going to get you to restore parts of the file system, because we probably won't have to do that in this course. A little bit out of scope. And there's additional miscellaneous commands that you can also learn how to use right here. Okay, so but basically I'd like to tell you this, that the commands I've covered with you already are most of the commands that I'm going to test you on next week on the quiz. Okay. Questions around today. So we covered a bunch of stuff today. We covered Git in GitHub very briefly at a very high level, what Git and GitHub are. We also covered very simple scripting, creating a little batch script and everything else on the command line here. We did that with different kinds of data. By the way, I forgot to put this up on GitHub. Git add dot git commit -m. We'll say added data file. Git push origin master. Let's push this up so you guys can have this. Right? And that should push everything up. So you should have that, because the link to GitHub is in your content folder for this week. Okay? And my VM is suddenly not starting. Can I share my screen? Not yet. We'll do it just after the everything is done. Any questions around this? Guys, otherwise, if you follow along with me, I know we covered a lot of stuff this week. And we're going to cover more and more on command line. I know command line can be scary for some people, but the more we use it, the easier it's going to get. Okay? Any questions or concerns? Again, as normal, I'm going to stick around after class. So we're already kind of past class by 5 minutes, but I'm going to stick around after class for a little bit longer in order for us to answer some questions. Okay? I know. Thank God I have a YouTube channel. I know I go fast. I'm so sorry about that. And there's a lot of content. But the great thing about this is that you have a chance to watch me do it live as well as see it recorded. Okay, so I'm going to stop recording now, and I'm going to open it up to you guys for any kind of questions or concerns as we go. So I'm going to stop the stream.